Even though we may believe it, not every client is worth it. Not every opportunity is actually an opportunity. Today, we're talking about the uncomfortable but necessary habit of saying no and why it might be the best new business development move you can make. Let's talk about it on the podcast.
Cue the music.
Yeah.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev with John Tyerman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
All right, welcome to another episode of Breaking BizDev. I'm John, he's Mark. Mark, how you doing?
I'm great, John. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Had a nice weekend, played some music,
and
now I'm ready to talk about saying no.
Yeah, what was the music all about? Speaking about saying yes to music, what was going on there?
Yeah, it's funny. We usually our calendar is pretty open, but we're starting to build a little bit of reputation locally. So there's a couple of gig venues that wanted to book us for a gig on Saturday.
Nice.
And we had the decision to make of going 2 towns over to play a gig from 9 to midnight at a place that paid less than the other gig that was right in our hometown. We could have friends coming, the kids could come watch at an earlier time. So we had to say no to one opportunity to say yes to the other.
Oh, there you go. You're bringing it back. You're bringing it back into the subject matter.
It's tying a full circle. That's what we do here.
It's good. Yeah. So this episode is about saying no. And this is a recurring theme in the work that I do with my clients, John.
And it's an important part because we often like to say yes to things and we often like to be helpful, but that's not the case when it comes to protecting your pipeline and your marketing investments. So today on the podcast, we're going to talk about the power of saying no and why you should say no to the wrong clients, why you should say no to marketing overload. And we'll kind of wrap it up with a bow at the end of what you can do to take it away, maybe some practical examples and activities.
Good. So yeah, you mentioned there saying no on sort of the selling end of things and saying no on the marketing end of things. So we're wandering across our marketing and sales continuum today on both ends. And on the sales end of things, largely we're saying no to external opportunities that we are presented with, or we ultimately create, or we just have to make decisions about. And then on the other end, a lot of those conversations are internal conversations on how best to use the limited resources that we have internally for marketing initiatives.
So let's break it down, Mark. Why is no such a powerful tool? Why is saying no so powerful?
I have some presentations, some things I talk through with my clients. This is a little bit of an aside on that. I'll get to the answer of that question, John, because it's an important one.
Yeah.
But I have a presentation that I talk about qualification, and qualification, as we've discussed previously on this podcast, is the very first step to determine fit in your sales conversations. And I throw up an image of these 2 medieval warriors doing battle on the battlefield. And the title of the presentation is qualification. And then the subtitle is the fierce defense of your pipeline. And so it's a little bit of again, a mindset shift, right? I'm hoping to kind of prompt people to start thinking, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to let everything we could into our sales pipeline because, we need business and, we need clients. And so we say yes to everything. But as I talk it through, your sales pipeline is the future work you'll be doing. They're the future clients you'll be working with. It's the future revenue that you will be receiving. It is quite literally the future of your firm. And you want your pipeline to be representative and reflective of the exact type of an organization that you're going to be in the next 6, 12, 18 months, whatever else it is. So yeah, I mean, hopefully this is a little bit of a mindset shift. And the power of saying no is so important because we have limited resources, right? And that's going to be a theme today, right? We have limited resources in which to work with clients. We have limited resources to do, different marketing initiatives or undertake anything. Frankly, we just have limited resources and we can't just act like all of our resources are unlimited.
I like this image of the medieval warriors on the
Yeah.
battlefield, knights,
Right.
I'm reminded of, saying yes to the wrong opportunity is like the Black Knight from Monty Python. "'Tis but a flesh wound," right? Off goes your arm. And
Yeah.
if you say yes to the wrong things too many times, you're just going to be left a bloody stump.
Yeah, you're a bloody stump, just there, a bloody stump, having been taken full advantage of with no resources left. So yeah, it's so powerful to say no, because on the flip side of this conversation is, we end up with all these fantastic yeses, right?
Mhm.
So all these good things we're saying yes to, but it's often so hard.
Well, and I think it's in our human nature to be helpful, right? And you kind of have to like go against that a little bit every time that you need to say no. Because I don't know, especially when you're in professional services, I think that it takes a certain kind of mindset, like that servant leadership mentality. And that is kind of like hard. It's a little counterintuitive to know what to say no to. And I think tying it to qualification is perfect because if you have tight qualification criteria, then it's easier to say no and go against that inherent like human characteristic.
Yeah, that's that's a good point about we just want to be helpful. Organizations, clients come to us with a need. Sometimes it's a competitive situation, sometimes not. They're just knocking at the door saying, "Look, we could really use some help." But regardless of how they come to you or how you come to this decision-making point, you need to vet them all carefully because, like we said, we have limited resources and, we have this crazy thing going on in our brain that wants us to help. The other stuff we have going on in our brain, I wanted to make sure we touched on this, is this whole idea of opportunity cost,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yep.
opportunity cost is the value that your organization, your firm forgoes. It's what you give up when choosing one option over another, right? And
Yep.
it can be monetary, it could be time and resources, it could be just effort, it could be energy. It's like, we've exhausted ourselves doing the thing we said yes to, and this other thing that we actually should have been focusing on, there's nothing left in the tank, right? We're just all exhausted. We're done. We can't say yes to this other thing that suddenly came along afterwards that might have actually been a better use of our time and money and energy and all that stuff. So
Mhm.
yeah, so that opportunity cost is an important concept. And I mentioned this thing going on in our brain that wants to help. The thing that's going on with this idea of opportunity cost is there's a bunch of cognitive biases kind of swimming through our brains,
Love
steering
this
our
topic.
decision making. Right.
So what are some of these cognitive biases?
Yeah. So we've touched on one in the past, loss aversion.
Mm-hmm.
Loss aversion is dramatically more difficult when we lose something, when something slips through our fingers, than when we actually gain something. That's more impactful to us. So we never want to say no because we never want to kind of lose that thing. The other
Right.
two that kind of come to mind that are kind of involved with this whole opportunity cost is the sunk cost fallacy. And the sunk cost fallacy is kind of makes us feel obligated to continue working on something, expending effort and time and energy on something if we've taken a step or two down the path with it. If we've already spent a little bit of time with something, we just feel obligated just to continue on. So,
Yeah.
right, we've already put some resources into it. We might as well just, keep going. So it's that whole thing where it's like, yeah, I'd agreed to a conversation or a meeting. I talked, I've spent an hour on it. At this point, we might as well just say yes and just kind of keep going,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not this is actually a smart decision to begin with. And then the other one is confirmation bias. And, confirmation bias is this thing for us to put more weight on things that sort of align with our current thinking. It's maybe a new business opportunity comes through and it's very similar to something you've done in the past, or it's something that very deeply, kind of maybe the client is a lot like someone you've worked with in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It has some similarities to it. So we're thinking, oh, yeah, this is just like that other thing. Let's just say yes to it. and it kind of feeds on itself right there. So, I mean, I don't know.
I guess if that other thing was a profitable engagement with a client that was really good, then I guess this could be a good thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you got to know what to look for.
Right. And a lot of times you think, well, of course, Mark, of course you'd say yes to the thing that was just like the other thing, but you let the potential similarities outweigh the need to assess this on its own independently. Right.
It could cloud your judgment.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally. So so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. This isn't people out there making, consciously terrible decisions on taking things on that they should have said no to, right? It's our brains are working against us here with all these different cognitive biases. So, it's a consideration. So there you go. There's one of the things that's at play with this whole no thing.
And I guess like the fear of missing out, that's loss aversion, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
FOMO,
So
right.
Fear of missing out on what could potentially be the one direction that you could take or another direction that you could take your firm in its growth trajectory, which is actually like why it's really important to understand what that direction is that you as an organization, what direction do you want to go in and how do you want to grow?
Right.
And keeping that in mind as like a North Star with every yes and no decision.
Yeah. Good. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. Why saying no is so powerful, the things that are working against us. It's not easy. These no decisions can be challenging. There can be people inside your organization who are pressuring decision-making one way or another. Our brains are, making a mess of things with all these biases we have in our heads. So the whole process is not easy.
Do you have any examples, Mark, of times where you made a hard decision to say no?
It's interesting. You say, I made a hard decision to say no. I have found that as time has gone on and I have said no with not all the time, but with more frequency, I've said no enough now, particularly with my own practice. I've said no enough now that I look at it as very empowering, kind of freeing, and a really important tool for me. I have worked with enough organizations to know what success looks like so that when I sort of entertain new opportunities that come my way, I'm kind of in tune with these new potential clients and whether they're a fit or not. I've got my sort of qualification questions that I run through. I can sense pretty early on whether or not this is going to be a good fit. And I have had success, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later. And I have had success when I say no to, have an action item on that meeting that I'm connecting them with someone else or, whatever else. So my no's, and I've had one fairly recently, and it was, I thought it was actually a good one. It was an organization that really wasn't a super fit. I have some good connections, and I think at this point some friends that I have developed that do a similar thing that I do. And to this person that came to me says, at this moment, I'm not sure that we are a great fit. What I would like you to do is go talk to this other person, and I'm going to connect you to them. I'm going to give you their contact information. I'll write an email and get you guys connected. What I'd like you to do is take everything that we've talked about and take everything that you talk about with them and just sort of think it through and think which one of us might actually be in a better fit or in more alignment with you, just to inform your decision making. When people want to work with me, I want them to come into it really comfortable and confident.
Yeah.
So referred that person over, and ultimately that person didn't end up working with either one of us. And whether it was both of those conversations or, ultimately it wasn't going to play out, they weren't going to advance at all with the whole thing anyways. I helped that person educate and sort of inform their sort of decision making, which I thought was a good end result, really, frankly, for both of us.
I think you're hitting on something that's very, very important, because saying no is a way to keep the buyer's best interest in mind. And I think that example that you just shared is a great way to kind of say, hey, we're not a good fit, but then you went the step further of making a referral to a reputable source.
Yeah.
So you're reinforcing your brand, your reputation in the marketplace by doing that and offering that value and paying it forward.
Right.
So I thought that was just a really important like piece of advice that folks that are listening to right now might kind of take away and be like, oh, okay, that's a tactful way to say no in a good way.
Yeah, people have a tough time with it. They can't process quite, okay, how am I actually going to say no without, feeling like I'm, giving them the short end of the stick or just, brushing them off. And I think there's a whole bunch of ways to do it. And if you keep the client at the center of all of this and just,
Exactly.
want to be helpful, yeah, you'll find a way through it.
So let's talk about saying no to the wrong kinds of clients. Now that we know the importance of saying no and how to do it in a respectful, tactful way, what are some of the things that maybe, Mark, you look for that are like misalignments or bad fits or like red flags?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that come to mind. One is sort of the speed or the cadence of when someone is coming to you. And what I mean by that is that are they showing up at the front door and they need something to happen immediately, right? Is it, oh, hey, hi, I've got this new thing, and maybe you're a project-based professional services firm out there, and someone comes to you with a project and their hair's on fire, and they're like, all right, I need to get a proposal from you tomorrow. That's a huge red flag because, there's a couple things going on. First of all, they could have a completely unreasonable, sort of
Sense
timeline.
of urgency.
Yeah. Like there's certain sense of urgency could be, like off. I mean, a sense of urgency in some cases is very good. In other cases, it's not good. Right. So this could be one of those bad.
This is on the extreme end.
Yeah. This could, right. That could be one of those bad ones. Plus, and we've talked about this, I think, a little bit in the past, is that you're allowing your clients to kind of dictate the whole buying, selling process, which, I throw the word out there, sort of control. You want to maintain some amount of control in the whole process. You don't want to be the one that is controlling in the process, but, if you're the seller, generally speaking, you've done this selling thing more than the buyers done the buying thing. That's kind of, for a lot of firms, that's the truth, right? We have done more selling than
get
they
more
have
reps.
done buying.
Yeah. Get more at-bats.
Yeah, we get more at-bats, exactly. So hopefully we're a little bit better at this than they are. So what that means is that we're letting someone who's potentially less experienced at this whole buying, selling thing coming in and starting to dictate direction, the timing, the terms, the, whatever else. And it's like, that is not good, right? We need to maintain some amount of control. Plus, we have our process. We have our series of conversations that we need to walk through. We need to qualify first, and then we need to discover, and then we need to propose with some options and things like that. So, and that takes a little bit of time. And if the work to be done has any amount of complexity, which most things out there do, right? This is going to take time to develop this sort of initial understanding, approach, et cetera. So the hair on fire stuff is a huge red flag, right? So there's other stuff. There's the dollars and cents. If the dollars and cents, are mentioned or discussed early on and they're way out of whack, and that typically means that the buyer hasn't really fully understood the complexity of what they need, of what they want to achieve. Yeah. So there's probably a mismatch there. And associated with that is they come and they say, hey, I'd love to talk to you guys about this. The last two firms that I've talked to are just super expensive. And so, here I am, I'm going to talk to you guys, and hopefully you guys can give me a proposal. And like for anybody, even if you don't consider yourself like a high cost provider, which, John, I've never worked with a firm who doesn't consider themselves a high cost provider, by the way, so even if you don't consider yourself sort of a high cost provider, that's a red flag. If someone comes to you and says, yeah, all the other guys I've talked to are too expensive. You're like, uh-oh, here we go.
Price sensitive.
Add us to the list. Right. So, and then there's the folks that only want to bite off a little tiny bit, but want to achieve this great big thing, which is sort of a scope thing, right? There's a complete scope mismatch. They're completely out of touch with the time and energy and complexity of all of this, and they only think it's a small thing. I use an analogy also in the work that I do. I use an analogy of the client comes to you with a problem or a need that they think, looks somewhat like a crack in the sidewalk. And you, the professional, are looking at them thinking, hey, this is the Grand Canyon, right? So there's your mismatch, right? So they're thinking, oh, this is a small thing. It's just a crack in the sidewalk, right? And you're thinking, you don't know. This looks more like the Grand Canyon to me.
I run into that so often in my line of work, producing podcast media. There's like repurposing like long form episodes into short form content.
Yeah.
It seems like, yes, there is efficiencies that are gained, but I think that like I've run into that with my own clients, a misunderstanding of the level of work involved and, everything that goes into what it takes to kind of pull those clips out.
Yeah.
So and then I've run into the price sensitive ones as well, even in just my couple years in business. So yep, there's all sorts of clients out there.
You're listening to Breaking BizDev,
the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Your hosts are John Tyerman, founder of Red Cedar Marketing, the podcast marketing company for experts and professional services firms,
and Mark Wainwright, principal consultant and founder of Wainwright Insight, the fractional sales manager and sales consultant to professional services firms.
If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by following the show and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
And now, back to the show. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of red flags. And unfortunately, we, and I listed a few there. Unfortunately, we are all too quick to dismiss them, or we are sort of numb to them. We don't recognize them for what they are. We don't put any level of sort of validity or credence to those sort of red flags that pop up, And one of the things that I often say is that, look, one of the most important things to keep in mind here is that if during this early conversation, this sort of determining fit, if you have concerns, but you sort of put them aside and then the process kind of continues, and this all sort of pre-contract stuff when you're talking through pricing or whatever else, contracting and things, and there's red flags popping up all over the place. If you ignore them, because you're thinking, look, as soon as we get the contract signed, it's going to turn into the perfect engagement with the perfect client. Yeah, I think you might be a little overly optimistic.
You're just sweeping it under the rug, and at some point you're going to trip. It's like those red flags that you could proactively address, like the understanding, the gap in understanding. That's just a conversation about and just level setting.
Right.
And then, you do that over and over again. And sometimes, if you run into one that's just a little bit, you're too far off, you can't bridge that gap, then watch out, don't trip.
Right. So the one of the other points I wanted to make in this, in sort of this saying no to the wrong clients thing, is that it's important that we prioritize qualifying people over projects. And again, specifically, this may be more relevant to some firms out there than others. But I don't know, I've worked with sort of wealth management clients in the past. And, they'll have a new prospective client shows up that has kind of a big portfolio. And they're like, wow, that's really going to add to our sort of, total assets under management. That's sort of the language that those folks use. And they completely disregard, the people, right? And so architects, engineers, whoever, consultants, analysts, whoever else you are, all too often people are focused on the work to be done and the project. Right. Ooh, this is a good project. It's this thing. We're a landscape architecture firm and they want to put this beautiful new park in this place. And, it's going to be great. And we're so excited about it. But they completely disregard the actual people that they'll be interacting with, the client. Right. And they just assume that the client's going to be, like everybody else, is tolerable. Right. They're just they're going to pay their bills, on time for the most part. And they're going to be okay to work with. And they completely gloss over a whole bunch of that stuff. So when problems arise over the course of, delivering work, in a lot of cases, the problems don't come from the project itself, the work to be done, right? We're pretty good at the work to be done. We've got that part handled. The problems arise from the people, right? So that underscores the importance of saying no up front to people that aren't a good fit, regardless of what the project looks like. And then that loss aversion comes, that FOMO hits us in the side of the head and says, we can't say no to this great project. But then everybody else is saying, yeah, but look at the client. They're a mess, right? They've ghosted you for 3 weeks. They have a proposal that's like, gathering dust in their inbox that you sent them. And it's like, what's going on here? So, yeah. So people over projects when we are in this whole qualification, saying no thing.
I think that's a great rule to live by, is the people over projects.
Yeah. Yeah. So the last thing that's worth touching on that we mentioned earlier on is that opportunities to, gracefully say no and sort of
Yep.
still show up with that prospective client. Like you're trying to help, right? You're really focused on them, which is the sort of the handoff, the referral, even it's, if you really want to work with us, great. That's clear. It looks like you and your team probably need to think some things through, need to, do your homework, whatever. It just feels like the timing isn't perfectly right. And it feels like, in the near term future, if we, sort of re-engage and continue our conversation, we're all going to be much, much, much more, informed and better prepared to say yes and move ahead. So, and sometimes that'll fall flat. They'll just go somewhere else and work with some other schlocky, consultant. But sometimes it says, hey, just take some time. It sounds like you need to get your stuff together on your end of things. Maybe you're talking to someone who's a champion of a particular idea inside their firm, but they don't have support and buy-in from everybody else there. Like the important decision makers aren't really bought into it. So maybe there's a need for them to do some sort of work internally so that when there's a yes, finally, that it comes from, the top, the decision makers in the organization, and everybody's all ready to go.
And I think that's another really good point, Mark, is, saying no doesn't have to always be, no, here's someone else that might be a good fit.
Yeah.
It could also be, no, it doesn't sound like you're there internally. Here's some resources to help you kind of get there.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of marketing can support that sales conversation, even though it's a no right now, doesn't mean that it's a no in the future.
Yeah. So that's the whole, sort of saying no sort of to the external clients. Let's wander into the, because this is your sort of end of the marketing and sales continuum, John. Let's wander into the sort of internal conversations that can happen around saying no to, marketing stuff, right?
I've been around a lot of marketers for, the last 10, 15 years, and there's a common affliction, I'll say. It's the shiny object syndrome. It's chasing all the shiny objects, the brand new platforms, the new technology, the new tactics. And I think, when it comes to saying no, I think when it's applied in a marketing sense, I think, again, qualification matters, right? So like if you're qualifying activities, where are you spending your time? Where are you spending your budget? I think when you're going through qualifying these different activities, you got to think through, okay, does this marketing activity help us achieve our business goals? What are our goals? Are we growing revenue by 20% this year? Are we trying to reduce client churn? Are we trying to expand client accounts? All of these different marketing objectives influence how you approach your marketing, budget allocation, time allocation. So does this activity help us achieve our goals? And then how? How is it going to do that? How are you going to connect the dots between this LinkedIn strategy and closed won revenue, right?
Yeah. Right.
So that's
there can't be too many dots. There can't be 14 dots between this thing and the results, right? It's got to be a little tighter than that.
Exactly. And so when it comes to kind of looking at your marketing strategy, and then how, first of all, does that marketing activity help us achieve our goals? Let's just go through the sake of effort. Let's just go through and say, yes, this marketing activity does help us achieve our goals. We understand how. And so I think that those are two good qualification criteria. But then if that activity helps us achieve our goals, what are the tactics underneath of that, right? And then again, you got to stay disciplined in understanding what those goals and objectives are, because this is where it can get a little washy. And like you said, you don't want to have too many dots. So for example, choosing one or two different channels to go deep in instead of wide,
Yeah,
right?
that speaks to me because, we've talked about this forever. We're all about going deep rather than going wide. Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
So, for example, like if you're constructing a marketing funnel, again, it's a framework that we've used on this show in the past. It's
Yeah.
easy for folks to understand. At the top of the funnel, maybe you want to choose one primary channel. Let's say it's LinkedIn. And then in the middle of the funnel, you want to choose another primary channel. What's the main middle of the funnel channel? Maybe it's a podcast. And then at the bottom, how are you going to turn potential maybes into potential yeses or maybe potential nos? And maybe it's an interactive audit or there's some quiz there that, helps you understand and qualify someone. So that's just an example of being very focused in where you're spending your marketing resources.
Yeah.
Because the flip side of that is if you're trying to be everywhere all at once. I remember listening to the Marketing School podcast, Neil Patel, like years and years ago, and he was all about omni-channel marketing. You have to be everywhere all the time. And I think at some point I subscribed to that a little bit. I was like, okay, yeah, that makes total sense, right? Putting that into practice is so tiring, and you don't gain any traction on any platform because your resources and your time allocations just totally spent elsewhere.
Right. And it's you being everywhere assumes that your fantastic clients are everywhere, and a lot of times they're not. A lot of times they have to make smart choices about where they spend their time and what they focus on. So that's a great point. You had another point in here about sort of the quality over quantity thing, and that's just singing to me.
Yeah, let's talk about that real quick. So I think when it comes to collaborating with marketing partners, it's a huge visibility accelerator is when you can find the right partner opportunity to co-market with. But if you find the wrong partner, that can be a colossal waste of effort and time. So qualifying your partnering opportunities is just as important as qualifying your sales opportunities. It's just
Sure.
as important as qualifying the channels and tactics that you use in
Sure.
your marketing
Yeah.
strategy. I guess like a good way to think about this is when you're selecting the channels, when you're selecting the tactics, when you're selecting partners that make up your marketing strategy and how you will execute, getting in front of the right people is more important than getting in front of quantity people. So if you've got visibility with 100 of the right kind of people that fit your ideal client profile, that's much better than getting 10,000 impressions with just like a random sample of people. You don't know if they are in market. You don't know if they fit your ideal client profile. They don't even know if they even are in a business that you could help.
But John, that flies in the face of this, sort of exponential growth curve that everybody wants in their sort of, downloads and, visitors and, all that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's important to be in front of the right people, not
Yeah.
just total volume.
Yeah. And I'd like to think that you and I have done a good enough job in sort of being really specific and focused about this podcast that we have the right people listening to our podcast, that everybody out there can sort of align with and sort of, connect themselves with what we're talking about. They can relate to this content because they're the right audience. We're not just out there spewing stuff and we get random listeners all the time. So I'd like to think that we're pretty well positioned.
I think so too. And I think it's also like you serve professional services firms. I serve professional services firms. So we have a common shared client base. There's a lot of overlap. I've got a little bit more experience maybe in the accounting industry. You've got a little bit more experience in the AEC industry, but
Right.
Together we can talk about a wide range of different industries and client types and sizes. So yeah, I think that this podcast is a great example of a marketing partnership.
Agreed. All right, let's wrap it up for our hopefully ideal customer audience out
Let's do
there
it.
who's listening closely to this. So every no decision that you make presents an opportunity to focus on something else, to spend your limited resources, your energy, your time, all of that on something else, right? It's that whole opportunity cost, and really understanding and embracing that opportunity cost, that, constantly thinking that, we have to really qualify these things well, because there could be something out there that's frankly even better. And I know that sounds a little sort of pie in the sky, but it's true. It happens a lot. And anybody who's been in this business for long enough has known that they said something, they said yes to something on Monday, and then something on Thursday showed up. You're like, oh, shoot.
Exactly.
That one's even better. So it's a tough world out there, but we need to be careful.
That's a great point. One of my big takeaways from this is that reframe that no doesn't have to be negative.
Yeah.
And if you're keeping the buyer in mind and you're telling them, hey, it's not a great fit right now, and whether you're triaging that to a trusted referral source that you have, or you're offering educational material to help your potential buyer get into a better frame of mind or a better understanding of how to engage with you, that's being empathetic in your marketing. You're understanding your buyer and helping them make the right decision. It's not negative. It's very, very positive.
Yeah, exactly. And you have a note here that there's a challenge that we can put out there to people. And actually, this makes me think of something. The challenge that you thought of was, you look at your calendar and say no to one thing this week, right? So I think that's good. This actually makes me think of a very specific situation where fairly early on, when I started working with one of my clients, they had, we had kind of a long list of potential projects. And I think this was early enough that they didn't really understand what having a really well-maintained, sharp, focused sales pipeline was. So there was just this pile of stuff that we had, and, we organized it up a little bit and tried to take a look at it, and it was a mess. So I got everybody together and I said, okay, folks, what are we going to kill today? And they all looked around the room like, are you kidding me? Yeah. I'm like, which one of these opportunities is going to get the axe?
Nice.
What are we going to say no to? What do we have to get rid of? And it was like I was, like taking their puppy or something. They were freaked out.
I guess you got to start building muscle somehow, right?
Yeah. So that was a fantastic exercise. And it was really, I think, one of this client's first experiences of, actually we can be empowered and we can say no to something and we can cross it off the line. And remember, we're not, we're not saying no to people, we're saying no to the project here. So that's super important.
Maybe it's not looking at your calendar. For folks that are listening to this, look at your pipeline.
Yeah, right.
What is an opportunity in your pipeline that you can say no to? And which opportunity is going to get the axe? I think that, like we just talked about, that's a great, first rep at saying no in a tactful way.
Right.
Well, Mark, this has been awesome. Is there anything else that you wanted to close with?
No, I mentioned this to you the other day as we were talking about this whole saying no thing. And I have this analogy of this block of marble, and people picture this big, quarry chunk of marble, and then you've got sort of like the statue of David or something like that, right? That was carved carefully out of this big block of marble. So that's the analogy here, and hopefully it's pretty obvious, is that every time you say no to something, you chip away at that big block of marble until you arrive at this final form that's beautiful, right? And you have to say no so that you can chip away and sort of create this final form of your organization, of your firm, that is something that you're excited about, something that your team members love, something that, is really reflective of your values, your personality, your people, your, the work you want to do in the future. It's that final form that you're after, and you can't get there if you keep saying yes to everything. So you're not chipping away at the block of marble. So that's kind of a fun analogy. I like to kind of do this whole sort of, picturing in my brain sort of process of chipping away and ending up with something that looks, like you.
Because David was inside that block of marble the whole time.
He was in there.
Right. And
Right,
all
good
Michelangelo had to do was just chip away at it.
Chip away.
I think that's a
Cool.
great visual to leave our listeners with.
Yeah. This was fun, John. Until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking BizDev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.